Before we begin, take a moment to settle into a comfortable position. Perhaps adjust your pillow, let your shoulders relax, and allow the noise of the modern world to slowly drift away. Tonight, we are traveling back to a time when the flip of a switch could not chase away the darkness, when every evening followed a rhythm that had guided humanity for thousands of years. Imagine standing in a small European village sometime during the Middle Ages. The sun is slowly disappearing behind distant hills, painting the sky with gentle shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The last rays of daylight touch the wooden rooftops before fading into silence. There are no glowing windows, no bright streetlights, no television screens, and certainly no smartphones lighting up faces. As the sun disappears, another world quietly awakens. For nearly all of human history, darkness was not simply the absence of light. It was a powerful force that changed nearly every part of daily life. It decided when people worked, when they rested, when they traveled, and even what they feared. Today, many cities remain bright throughout the night. Artificial lighting allows people to shop at midnight, work overnight, and stay awake long after sunset. But for our ancestors, the setting sun often marked the natural ending of the day. Life slowed down. Across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, families hurried to finish their final outdoor tasks before darkness settled across the land. Farmers gathered their animals into barns. Shepherds returned their flocks from nearby fields. Children were called inside before the shadows became too long. Every minute of daylight mattered.
Before we begin, take a moment to settle into a comfortable position. Perhaps adjust your pillow, let your shoulders relax, and allow the noise of the modern world to slowly drift away. Tonight, we are traveling back to a time when the flip of a switch could not chase away the darkness, when every evening followed a rhythm that had guided humanity for thousands of years. Imagine standing in a small European village sometime during the Middle Ages. The sun is slowly disappearing behind distant hills, painting the sky with gentle shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The last rays of daylight touch the wooden rooftops before fading into silence. There are no glowing windows, no bright streetlights, no television screens, and certainly no smartphones lighting up faces. As the sun disappears, another world quietly awakens. For nearly all of human history, darkness was not simply the absence of light. It was a powerful force that changed nearly every part of daily life. It decided when people worked, when they rested, when they traveled, and even what they feared. Today, many cities remain bright throughout the night. Artificial lighting allows people to shop at midnight, work overnight, and stay awake long after sunset. But for our ancestors, the setting sun often marked the natural ending of the day. Life slowed down.
Across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, families hurried to finish their final outdoor tasks before darkness settled across the land. Farmers gathered their animals into barns. Shepherds returned their flocks from nearby fields. Children were called inside before the shadows became too long. Every minute of daylight mattered. Without electricity, daylight was one of the most valuable resources a family possessed. Lost daylight meant unfinished work, and unfinished work could mean hunger during winter. Inside homes, preparations for the night began surprisingly early. Simple evening meals were cooked over open fires. Pots of soup gently simmered while fresh bread warmed beside glowing embers. The smell of wood smoke filled the air, mixing with herbs, roasted vegetables, and occasionally meat for wealthier households. As families ate together, the only sounds were quiet conversations, crackling firewood, and perhaps the distant barking of a village dog. The darkness outside grew deeper. Most homes owned very little artificial light. A single candle could be expensive. Oil lamps required precious fuel. Many poorer families simply relied on the fireplace for both warmth and light. Its flickering glow reached only a small corner of the room. Beyond that circle of light waited complete darkness. It is difficult for us today to imagine true darkness. Modern cities rarely experience it. Even on cloudy nights, distant lights brighten the horizon. Yet before electricity, many people lived under skies so dark that the stars appeared almost endless. On clear evenings, the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a pale river of light. For people living centuries ago, the night sky was not hidden behind city lights. It was part of everyday life. Many knew the stars better than maps. Sailors navigated oceans using constellations. Farmers watched the changing position of the stars as the seasons passed. Travelers followed the moon across lonely roads. But despite its beauty, darkness also brought uncertainty. Many believed dangerous spirits wandered after sunset. Strange sounds carried farther during the night. Every snapping twig could be mistaken for a wolf, a thief, or something far more mysterious. Whether those fears were real or imagined hardly mattered. Darkness naturally limited what people could safely do. Travel became dangerous. Roads were rough and uneven. Bridges could disappear into blackness. Without lanterns, a traveler might easily lose the path, fall into a ditch, or become the target of robbers. As a result, most journeys ended before sunset whenever possible. Villages themselves slowly became quieter. One by one, conversations faded. Doors were secured with wooden bars. Animals settled into their shelters. The fire became the center of the household. People repaired clothing, carved wooden tools, spun wool, or quietly shared stories passed down through generations. These stories often filled the long evenings. Some told tales of heroic kings. Others warned children about creatures said to roam forests after dark. Some stories explained the stars above, while others reminded listeners to respect the unknown. Storytelling was not simply entertainment, it preserved history.
It strengthened families. It helped pass knowledge from one generation to the next. Eventually, even these conversations slowed. The fire burned lower. The room became cooler. Outside, only insects, owls, and distant animals broke the silence. Many people felt naturally sleepy only a few hours after sunset. This was no coincidence. Their bodies followed the changing light of the sun far more closely than ours do today. Without bright artificial lighting, the human brain began producing sleep-related hormones much earlier in the evening. People became tired because nature told them it was time to rest. This rhythm had shaped humanity for countless generations. Long before clocks measured hours, sunlight measured life itself. Morning meant activity, evening meant rest, night meant patience. Of course, not everyone immediately went to bed. Some occupations continued after sunset. Bakers often began their work long before dawn. Night watchmen guarded sleeping towns. Monks woke for midnight prayers. Fishermen sometimes launched their boats under moonlight. But these were exceptions rather than the rule. For most ordinary families, darkness encouraged stillness. Their evenings were shorter. Their world became quieter, and sleep arrived in a way that feels surprisingly unfamiliar today. Not because they were lazy, not because they lacked ambition, but because nature itself set the schedule. As we continue our journey through history, we will discover that going to bed before electricity involved far more than simply lying down when it became dark.
Where people slept, who they shared their beds with, how they dealt with insects, cold weather, fear, dreams, and even waking during the middle of the night, all reveal a fascinating world that has almost disappeared. So let the fire burn gently in your imagination. Listen to the soft evening sounds of a village preparing for another peaceful night beneath countless stars. The sun has set. The village has grown quiet, and our journey into the sleeping world of history is only just beginning. The last glow of the evening sun has now disappeared beyond the horizon. Across the countryside, darkness quietly settles over fields, forests, rivers, and villages. The world has become noticeably calmer. Without the constant hum of engines or the glow of electric lights, the night feels almost alive with gentle sounds. A cool breeze moves through the trees. Crickets begin their nightly chorus. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls into the darkness. For people living hundreds of years ago, this was the signal that the busiest part of the day had finally come to an end. Unlike modern evenings, there was rarely a long list of entertainment waiting after dinner. No television to watch, no endless scrolling through social media, no emails to answer, no bright advertisements inviting people to stay awake just a little longer. Instead, evenings followed a rhythm that had remained almost unchanged for generations. As family members entered their homes, the first task was often to make sure the fire was still burning. In many houses, the fireplace served several purposes at once. It provided warmth, cooked food, gave light, dried wet clothing, and even helped keep wild animals away from the house. Allowing the fire to die completely could make the entire home cold by morning. Keeping it alive required constant attention. Many families carefully covered the glowing embers with ashes before going to sleep. Hidden beneath the ash, the heat could survive until sunrise, making it easier to restart the fire the following morning without striking a new flame. This simple habit saved valuable time and precious fuel. Preparing for the night also meant caring for the household. Animals needed one final check before bed. A cow might need fresh water. A horse could require extra hay. Chickens were safely locked inside their coop to protect them from foxes and other predators. For farming families, healthy animals often meant survival through the winter. Only after these important duties were complete could people truly relax. Inside the house, the evening meal was usually the largest meal after a long day's work. The menu depended greatly on where people lived and how wealthy they were. Poor families might eat dark bread, vegetable stew, beans, onions, cabbage, or porridge. Those with greater wealth could enjoy cheese, fresh butter, smoked meat, roasted poultry, or fish. Fresh fruit was available only during certain seasons. Sugar remained a rare luxury in many parts of Europe for centuries. Water was common, but many people also drank weak beer or small ale, which was often safer than untreated water found in rivers or wells. As everyone gathered around the table, meals became an important social moment. Stories from the day's work were shared. Children listened while older family members discussed crops, weather, neighbors, or upcoming religious festivals. Without modern distractions, conversation itself became one of the evening's greatest pleasures. After eating, dishes were cleaned by hand using simple wooden bowls, clay pottery, or metal plates, depending on the family's wealth. Nothing was wasted. Food left on the table was carefully stored for the next meal. Breadcrumbs might later feed chickens. Animal bones could become tools or broth. Every resource mattered. Once the household had been cleaned, quieter evening activities began. Women often spun wool into thread by the firelight. Others repaired torn clothing or carefully stitched blankets that had been damaged through daily use. Men sharpened farming tools, carved wooden spoons, repaired baskets, or prepared equipment needed for the next day's work. Children rarely remained idle. Many learned valuable skills simply by watching their parents. A daughter might practice sewing beside her mother. A son could help twist rope or clean tools beside his father. Education often happened naturally through observation rather than formal lessons. As darkness deepened, candles became increasingly valuable. Unlike today, people did not casually burn candles for hours. Wax candles were expensive and usually reserved for churches or wealthy households. Ordinary families often relied on tallow candles made from animal fat. These burned with a smoky flame and carried a rather unpleasant smell. Even these simple candles represented a valuable household resource. If there was no important work to finish, many families simply chose not to light one at all. Instead, they sat near the fireplace, allowing its flickering light to illuminate only part of the room. Beyond the firelight, shadows danced across wooden walls. The corners of the house disappeared into darkness. For many people, these deep shadows encouraged imagination. Ancient stories, local legends, and religious beliefs blended together in the quiet hours after sunset. Some believed spirits wandered through forests. Others warned of witches, ghosts, or mysterious creatures that appeared only after dark. Whether these tales were believed literally or simply respected as tradition, they influenced how people experienced the night. Children especially listened with wide eyes. Parents sometimes used these stories to encourage good behavior. Stay close to home after sunset. Never wander into the woods alone. Respect the darkness. In many ways, these lessons also carried practical wisdom. Traveling after dark truly was dangerous. The stories simply made the warning easier to remember. As the evening continued, fatigue slowly spread through the household. Hours of physical labor had exhausted nearly everyone. Unlike many people today, our ancestors spent much of their waking hours walking, lifting, digging, carrying water, chopping wood, or working in fields. Their bodies naturally welcomed rest. Without bright artificial lighting delaying the body's internal clock, sleepiness arrived gently but steadily. Eyes grew heavy. Voices became quieter. Children often fell asleep beside the fire before reaching their beds. Parents smiled, wrapped them in blankets, and carried them to their sleeping places. Outside, the village had become almost completely silent. Only an occasional barking dog, distant church bell, or rustling wind disturbed the stillness. Above every rooftop stretched an endless sky filled with stars. There were no glowing city lights to hide them. For countless generations, this peaceful sky marked the end of another ordinary day. It reminded people that tomorrow's work would begin again with sunrise. And so one by one, families prepared to leave the warmth of the fire behind. They checked the doors, they whispered their evening prayers, They made certain the embers would survive until morning. Then, carrying only a small candle, or perhaps no light at all, they stepped into the darkness of their homes to find their beds. But what those beds actually looked like, and who might already be sleeping in them, is a story all its own. That is where our journey continues next. By the time the family was ready for bed, the house had become remarkably dark. The warm glow from the fireplace reached only a few feet into the room. Beyond it, furniture faded into shadows. Every corner seemed deeper than it had during the day, and familiar objects took on unfamiliar shapes. Today, we think very little about turning on a light. A simple switch can flood an entire room with brightness in an instant. For most of human history, however, every bit of light required effort, fuel, and money. Light itself was a valuable resource. People used it carefully. Long before electricity, evenings were illuminated by four main sources of light: the open fire, oil lamps, tallow candles made from animal fat, and beeswax candles. Each had its own advantages, disadvantages, and cost. For the poorest families, the fireplace remained the most dependable source of light. The fire was already burning to cook meals and warm the house, so it made sense to gather around it after sunset. Children played near its warmth. Parents repaired clothing. Grandparents told stories while sparks drifted slowly upward into the chimney. Yet the fireplace was far from perfect. Its light flickered constantly. Smoke often filled the room, especially in homes with poor ventilation. During windy nights, smoke could even blow back into the house, making eyes water and breathing uncomfortable. Still, it was far better than complete darkness. Those who could afford something more often used simple oil lamps. The earliest oil lamps had existed for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans used small clay or metal lamps filled with oil. A woven wick rested inside the oil, drawing fuel upward through tiny fibers until it reached the flame. Olive oil was common around the Mediterranean. In northern Europe, where olive trees could not easily grow, people often burned fish oil, nut oil, or other locally available oils. These lamps gave a steadier light than an open fire. But fuel was never free. Every evening spent burning oil meant fewer supplies for tomorrow. Families learned to use only as much light as absolutely necessary. Candles were another familiar source of light. Yet not all candles were equal. Most ordinary people relied on tallow candles. Tallow was made by slowly melting animal fat, usually from cattle or sheep. The fat was cleaned, cooled, and formed into candles around a simple wick. They were inexpensive compared with beeswax, but they had many problems. They smoked heavily. They dripped melted fat onto tables and floors. Their flames often flickered. The menu depended greatly on where people lived and how wealthy they were. Poor families might eat dark bread, vegetable stew, beans, onions, cabbage, or porridge. Those with greater wealth could enjoy cheese, fresh butter, smoked meat, roasted poultry, or fish. Fresh fruit was available only during certain seasons. Sugar remained a rare luxury in many parts of Europe for centuries. Water was common, but many people also drank weak beer or small ale, which was often safer than untreated water found in rivers or wells. As everyone gathered around the table, meals became an important social moment. Stories from the day's work were shared. Children listened while older family members discussed crops, weather, neighbors, or upcoming religious festivals. Without modern distractions, conversation itself became one of the evening's greatest pleasures. After eating, dishes were cleaned by hand using simple wooden bowls, clay pottery, or metal plates, depending on the family's wealth. Nothing was wasted. Food left on the table was carefully stored for the next meal. Breadcrumbs might later feed chickens. Animal bones could become tools or broth. Every resource mattered. Once the household had been cleaned, quieter evening activities began. Women often spun wool into thread by the firelight.
The safest choice was often to wait until sunrise. Darkness naturally shortened the working day. In towns and cities, streets remained surprisingly dark. There were no rows of electric streetlights guiding people home. Some larger cities placed lanterns in important public areas, but these were limited and often extinguished before dawn to save fuel. Anyone walking outside at night usually carried a lantern. Without one, even familiar roads could become difficult to navigate. Rain turned paths into mud. Loose stones hid beneath the darkness. Simple holes in the road became dangerous obstacles. Travel after sunset demanded patience. It also demanded caution. Strong winds created another challenge. A sudden gust could extinguish a candle within seconds. Oil lamps needed protection from rain. Lanterns were designed with glass or thin sheets of horn to shield the flame while still allowing light to shine through. Even then, accidents happened. One careless movement could leave someone standing in complete darkness. Perhaps the greatest danger of all was fire. Nearly every source of light involved an open flame. Homes built from wood, thatch, straw, and dry timber could catch fire with frightening speed. A single overturned candle might destroy an entire house. In crowded medieval towns, one burning building could quickly spread flames through an entire neighborhood. For this reason, people developed careful habits.
Candles were never placed carelessly. Children were warned to stay away from flames. Before bed, every lamp and candle was checked again and again. Some families extinguished every flame except the protected embers inside the fireplace. Others assigned one final person to inspect the house before everyone slept. These nightly routines became second nature. Over generations, people learned to respect fire as both friend and enemy. It brought warmth during freezing winters. It cooked meals that kept families alive. It illuminated dark evenings. Yet it demanded constant attention. Looking back, it is remarkable how little light our ancestors actually lived with. A modern smartphone screen often produces more usable light than an entire medieval cottage. A single electric bulb would have seemed almost magical to someone living 500 years ago. Yet, despite this limited brightness, people adapted beautifully. Their eyes adjusted more naturally to darkness. They memorized the layout of their homes. They recognized familiar sounds. They accepted that some parts of life simply belonged to the night.
Instead of fighting the darkness, they learned to live alongside it. As the final candle slowly burned lower, shadows stretched across the walls once more. The room became quieter. The fire settled into glowing embers. Outside, the stars continued their silent journey across the sky. Inside the house, another important question remained. When it was finally time to sleep, where exactly did people lie down? The answer depended greatly on wealth, location, and social class, and it was often far less comfortable than we might imagine. That is the story we will explore next.
The final candle has almost burned away. Only the fireplace still glows softly, sending a warm orange light across the wooden floor. Outside, the village is wrapped in complete darkness. Nearly every door has been closed, every animal settled into its shelter, and every day's task has finally come to an end. Now the household prepares for one final ritual: going to bed. Today, bedtime often happens whenever we choose. Some people stay awake until midnight watching movies. Others answer emails long after sunset. Many fall asleep with televisions, smartphones, or bright bedside lamps still glowing nearby. For a medieval family, bedtime followed a much simpler rhythm. It was guided not by clocks, but by light. As the evening grew darker, the body naturally began preparing for sleep. Without electric lighting to delay this process, people often became sleepy just a few hours after sunset. Their internal clocks followed the seasons. In the middle of summer, when daylight lasted longer, people naturally stayed awake later. During the dark days of winter, bedtime could arrive surprisingly early. This changing rhythm felt perfectly normal. Nature decided the schedule. Before anyone lay down, several important tasks still remained. The fireplace had to be made safe. Many families carefully spread ashes over the glowing coals, allowing just enough heat to survive until morning, while reducing the risk of sparks escaping during the night.
Doors were checked one final time. Simple wooden bars were placed across entrances. Shutters covering small windows were closed tightly against cold winds. In wealthier homes, servants often completed these final inspections. In ordinary cottages, every family member helped. Water buckets were sometimes left near the fire in case of emergencies. Animals were given one last glance. A barking dog outside might warn of strangers. A restless horse could signal approaching storms. Life depended upon paying attention. Personal cleanliness also played a role in bedtime, although it looked very different from modern routines. Few people enjoyed daily hot baths. Heating enough water required tremendous effort. Instead, many washed their hands and faces using a small wooden bowl filled with cool water. Some rinsed their mouths. Others simply wiped away the dust of the day's labor using a damp cloth. Clean linen worn beneath outer clothing helped reduce dirt and absorbed sweat. Although medieval hygiene is often misunderstood today, many people valued cleanliness whenever circumstances allowed. Evening prayers were another important part of life. Across Christian Europe, families frequently gathered together before sleeping. Parents thanked God for another safe day. Children learned simple prayers from an early age. Some asked for protection from illness, storms, fire, or bad dreams. The quiet words echoed gently through the room before silence returned once more. Elsewhere in the world, people followed their own religious traditions.
Whether in an Islamic city, a Buddhist monastery, a Hindu village, or a Jewish household, evening often became a time for reflection, gratitude, and spiritual comfort before rest. Night encouraged contemplation. With little light and few distractions, the mind naturally turned inward. Parents also prepared their children for sleep. Babies were wrapped tightly in blankets to help them stay warm during chilly nights. Older children changed into simple sleeping garments or loosened their everyday clothing before climbing into bed. Families rarely owned wardrobes filled with different pajamas. Most slept in long linen shirts or undergarments. Comfort mattered more than fashion. Meanwhile, adults quietly discussed the plans for tomorrow. Would the weather allow planting? Did the roof need repairs? Would someone travel to the nearby market? These conversations were brief. Everyone understood that sunrise would come early. The body longed for rest. Unlike modern evenings filled with constant entertainment, bedtime itself happened gradually. There was no sudden moment when every light switched off. Instead, the room slowly became darker as candles burned lower. Conversations faded. The fire softened into glowing embers. One by one, each family member settled into silence. Outside, nature continued its own nightly routine.
An owl hunted silently through nearby woods. Foxes searched open fields. Wind gently moved through tall grasses. Clouds drifted across the stars. Inside the cottage, only the occasional crackle of burning wood disturbed the stillness. Even sleeping arrangements reflected family life. Parents often slept beside young children. Grandparents might rest only a few feet away. Privacy, as we understand it today, was uncommon for ordinary households. Most families simply accepted shared living spaces as part of everyday life. The wealthy experienced bedtime differently. Large manor houses and castles contained separate bedchambers, thick curtains, feather mattresses, embroidered blankets, and servants who prepared rooms before their masters retired. Some noble families even warmed beds by placing heated stones or metal warming pans beneath blankets before bedtime. Yet despite these comforts, they still depended on candlelight and fireplaces. Electricity remained many centuries away. No matter how rich or poor someone was, darkness eventually claimed every home. As eyes adjusted, familiar shapes slowly disappeared into blackness.
The day's worries became quieter. Breathing slowed. The village itself seemed to fall asleep together. But one interesting difference remained. For many people during the Middle Ages, going to bed did not necessarily mean sleeping through the entire night. In fact, historians believe millions of people regularly woke up for an hour or more in the middle of the night before returning to sleep again. It sounds unusual today, yet for centuries, this may have been one of the most ordinary parts of human life. And that remarkable nighttime habit is where our story will soon lead us. The house has finally fallen silent. The fire glows faintly beneath a blanket of warm ashes, and outside only the wind and the distant call of an owl disturb the peaceful night. Now comes a question that many of us rarely think about. When people finally went to sleep hundreds of years ago, what were they actually sleeping on? If we were to step inside the home of an ordinary family in medieval Europe, we would quickly notice that bedrooms as we know them today hardly existed. Most small cottages had only one main room. The fireplace stood in the center of family life. Meals were cooked there. Tools were repaired there. Stories were shared there. And when night arrived, it also became the place where many people slept. The idea of every family member having a private bedroom was unimaginable for most people. Instead, sleeping spaces were arranged wherever there was enough room. Some families owned simple wooden bed frames. Others slept on benches, built-in wooden platforms, or directly on the floor. Comfort depended almost entirely on wealth. For the poorest laborers, the bed was often nothing more than a cloth sack filled with straw. This simple mattress was known as a straw tick.
Fresh, dry straw created a surprisingly soft place to rest, but time slowly changed it. Night after night, the straw became flattened. Moisture from the air and the sleeper's body caused it to lose its shape. Eventually, insects found their way inside. Every few months, the old straw had to be removed and replaced with fresh material. It was hard work, but it made a noticeable difference. Families who could afford something better sometimes filled their mattresses with hay, dried leaves, wool, feathers, or even horsehair. Feather beds were considered a luxury. Sleeping on one was a sign of comfort and prosperity. A thick feather mattress gently shaped itself around the body, offering far more support than straw ever could. For many ordinary people, however, such comfort remained only a dream. The bed frame itself was usually made from sturdy wood. It did not resemble the polished furniture found in modern homes. These frames were practical rather than decorative. Ropes or leather straps were stretched tightly across the frame to support the mattress above. Over time, the ropes loosened and sagged. From time to time, they needed to be tightened again. This simple maintenance gave rise to the old expression, "sleep tight." While historians still debate the exact origin of the phrase, tightened ropes certainly helped create a firmer and more comfortable bed.
Pillows also varied greatly. The wealthy rested their heads on soft feather pillows covered with fine linen. Poorer families often used bags filled with straw, wool, or scraps of cloth. Some people simply folded a blanket beneath their heads. Even a simple pillow represented valuable household property. Blankets were equally important. Winter nights across northern Europe could become bitterly cold. Without central heating, the fire slowly cooled after everyone had gone to bed. Heavy wool blankets trapped precious body heat. Animal furs provided extra warmth. Those unable to afford enough bedding often slept wearing much of their everyday clothing. Some even wore hats while sleeping to stay warm. Children frequently shared blankets with parents or siblings. Body heat itself became an important source of warmth. Curtained beds were another fascinating feature of medieval life. Many wealthier homes placed heavy fabric curtains around the bed. These curtains served several purposes. They trapped warm air during freezing nights. They reduced drafts from cold stone walls. They offered a small measure of privacy inside busy households. And they blocked some of the smoke drifting through the room from nearby fireplaces. To us, these beds might appear elegant, yet they were designed as much for survival as for comfort.
Even the direction of the bed sometimes mattered. In many communities, local traditions suggested the safest way to position a bed inside the house. Some believed sleeping with one's head facing a particular direction brought good fortune. Others followed religious customs or family traditions passed down through generations. Not every belief had practical value, but together they helped people feel secure during the long hours of darkness. One thing nearly every home had in common was simplicity. Bedrooms were not filled with decorations. There were no bedside lamps, no alarm clocks, no electric fans, no glowing digital displays. The room itself was quiet, almost completely dark. The smell of wood smoke lingered softly in the air. Outside, stars stretched across the night sky beyond the small wooden window. For many people, this peaceful simplicity became the natural setting for sleep. Yet, comfort alone could not guarantee a good night's rest. The warm straw beneath a blanket sometimes hid unwelcome visitors, tiny insects, fleas, lice, and perhaps the most notorious nighttime companion of all, the bedbug. For countless generations, these tiny creatures shared humanity's sleeping spaces, turning many peaceful nights into restless ones. Their story and the nightly battle against them is where our journey continues next.
The house is quiet. The fire has faded into glowing embers, and everyone has finally settled beneath heavy blankets. The room is dark, except for a faint orange glow that gently flickers across the wooden walls. If you could step inside this home tonight, one detail would almost certainly surprise you. There are far fewer beds than people. In the modern world, many of us grow up expecting our own bed, or at least our own bedroom. Privacy has become a normal part of everyday life. For most of human history, however, sleeping alone was the exception, not the rule. Beds were expensive. A well-built wooden bed frame required skilled craftsmanship. Mattresses filled with straw, wool, or feathers demanded valuable materials. Blankets took countless hours to weave by hand. Owning even one proper bed represented a significant investment. As a result, families made the most of what they had. A husband and wife naturally shared a bed. Their young children often slept beside them. An infant might rest in a cradle near the fire or between the parents for warmth during cold nights. Older brothers and sisters frequently shared another mattress nearby. In the smallest cottages, the entire family could sleep in the same room. To modern eyes, such arrangements might seem crowded. To medieval families, they were perfectly ordinary. Sharing a bed offered practical advantages. Warmth was perhaps the greatest.
Without central heating, winter nights could become dangerously cold. Stone houses trapped moisture. Wooden cottages allowed icy winds to creep through tiny cracks. Every extra person beneath the blankets meant more shared body heat. Sleeping together helped everyone stay warmer until sunrise. There was also a sense of security. Parents remained close enough to comfort frightened children after a nightmare. If someone became ill during the night, family members noticed immediately. A strange sound outside could awaken everyone at once. In uncertain times, sleeping close together simply made sense. The idea of privacy inside the home developed much later. For centuries, everyday life happened together. Families cooked together, worked together, ate together, and slept together. Even wealthy households often had more people in a bedroom than we might expect today. Large, noble beds with heavy curtains appear luxurious in paintings, but servants frequently entered these rooms to light fires, prepare clothing, or assist their employers before bedtime and after sunrise. Absolute privacy was rare, even among the rich. Travelers experienced an even more surprising reality. Imagine arriving at a roadside inn after walking for 20 miles. The sun has already set. Your feet ache. Your clothes are covered in dust. You simply want a warm meal and a place to sleep. The innkeeper smiles kindly and leads you upstairs. But instead of a private room, you discover a single enormous bed already occupied by several strangers. This was completely normal. Throughout medieval and early modern Europe, inns often placed multiple travelers together in one bed. Sometimes 4 people shared it, sometimes 6. During busy seasons, even more. People who had never met before might spend an entire night sleeping shoulder to shoulder. At first, this sounds uncomfortable, yet beds were valuable and available space was limited. Most travelers accepted the arrangement without complaint. Historical records even describe merchants discussing business before falling asleep beside complete strangers. Some exchanged stories from distant towns. Others shared news about roads, weather, or local markets. A crowded bed often became an unexpected place for conversation. Of course, this system had its disadvantages. Not every stranger was trustworthy. Theft occasionally occurred. Snoring could keep everyone awake. One restless sleeper disturbed the entire bed.
And illnesses spread far more easily when people slept so closely together. Still, for someone exhausted after days of travel, even a crowded bed felt far better than sleeping outdoors. Different cultures developed their own sleeping customs. Across Japan, many families slept on soft futons spread directly across woven tatami mats. Each morning, the bedding was carefully folded away to create more living space. Among nomadic peoples of Central Asia, thick felt rugs and animal skins covered the floors of portable tents known as yurts. Entire families slept together around the warmth of a central fire. In parts of the Middle East and North Africa, people often rested on cushions and woven mats, adjusting their bedding according to the changing seasons. Although materials differed, one idea remained remarkably consistent. Sleeping was often a shared experience rather than an individual one. Even royalty rarely slept entirely alone. Kings and queens certainly had magnificent beds, draped with silk curtains and embroidered blankets. Yet servants frequently remained nearby throughout the night. Guards stood outside bedchamber doors. Ladies-in-waiting, or personal attendants, sometimes slept in adjoining rooms, always ready if needed. Status brought luxury. It did not always bring solitude. Looking back, it becomes clear that our modern expectations of personal space are relatively recent. For thousands of years, the bed represented more than a place to rest. It was a place of warmth, safety, family, community, sometimes even unexpected friendship.
As the household drifts deeper into sleep, gentle breathing fills the room. Blankets rise and fall with each quiet breath. The fire continues to glow softly. Outside, the stars slowly move across the night sky. Everything feels peaceful. But beneath the blankets, hidden among the straw, wool and wooden bed frames, tiny creatures are beginning to wake. Invisible to sleepy eyes, they have shared humanity's nights for countless generations. And for many families, they made peaceful sleep far more difficult than the darkness ever could. That quiet struggle will be the story of our next chapter.
The night has grown even quieter. The last glowing embers in the fireplace cast a soft orange light across the room before slowly fading beneath a blanket of grey ash. Outside, a gentle wind moves through the trees, carrying with it the cool scent of earth and distant forests. Inside the cottage, everyone is asleep. Or at least, they are trying to be. Long before electricity, people faced a challenge that we rarely think about today: the weather. There were no electric heaters humming through the winter, no air conditioners cooling the air during summer, no thermostats quietly maintaining the perfect temperature all night long. Instead, every season brought its own struggles, and sleeping comfortably required experience, preparation, and a little creativity. Let us begin with winter. For many people living in Northern Europe, winter nights were long, dark, and bitterly cold. Snow covered fields for weeks or even months, ice formed along rivers, the sun disappeared early in the afternoon, leaving families with many hours of darkness before morning. Inside a simple wooden cottage, the fireplace remained the only real source of warmth.
Even after a large evening fire, the temperature slowly dropped as the night passed. By dawn, the room could feel almost as cold as the world outside. Stone houses presented an even greater challenge.
Their thick walls offered protection from wind and attackers, but they also absorbed the cold. Walking barefoot across a stone floor on a winter morning could feel like stepping onto ice. To survive these nights, families relied on layers. Heavy wool blankets were among the most valuable possessions in the home. Unlike cotton, wool continued to provide warmth even when slightly damp. Some blankets had been passed down through generations, carefully repaired whenever holes appeared. Animal furs added another layer of protection. Sheepskins were especially common. Their soft wool trapped warm air close to the body, creating natural insulation that worked surprisingly well. Many people also slept wearing much of their everyday clothing. A long linen shirt might be covered by a wool tunic. Some wrapped scarves around their necks. Others kept wool caps on their heads throughout the night, knowing that much body heat escaped from uncovered skin. Hands were sometimes tucked beneath blankets or beneath the body itself to stay warm. Before climbing into bed, families often warmed themselves beside the fire for several minutes. Children stretched out tiny hands toward the flames. Parents turned slowly, warming both front and back before saying goodnight. Once under the blankets, everyone tried to hold on to that precious warmth for as long as possible. Among wealthier households, another clever solution appeared. Servants sometimes prepared the bed using a warming pan. This was a metal container with a long wooden handle filled with hot coals from the fireplace. The warming pan was gently moved beneath the blankets before bedtime, heating the sheets without exposing them to open flames. Once the bed felt comfortably warm, the pan was removed. For someone climbing into bed on a freezing January night, this simple luxury must have felt wonderful.
Yet great care was always necessary. If the coals were too hot, or if someone became careless, bedding could catch fire. Fire remained both a trusted friend and a dangerous enemy. Now let us leave winter behind and imagine a warm summer evening. The challenges were completely different. Instead of shivering beneath heavy blankets, people searched for every possible breeze. During the hottest weeks of the year, sleeping indoors could become uncomfortable. Small cottages trapped heat from the cooking fire. Thick stone walls slowly released warmth gathered during the day. The air became still. Windows were often opened whenever weather allowed. Simple wooden shutters remained partly open to encourage fresh air. Some families slept with doors slightly ajar, trusting neighbors and hoping for a cool nighttime breeze. In rural areas, the sounds of summer drifted gently into the house. Crickets sang endlessly. Frogs called from nearby ponds. Leaves rustled softly overhead. Without engines or electric machinery, these natural sounds became the soundtrack of the night. Blankets changed with the seasons. Heavy wool coverings were folded away. Light linen sheets became far more comfortable. Some people slept with only a thin cloth covering their bodies. Others rested directly upon straw mattresses with little more than a simple linen shirt. Even so, hot nights could be restless. Mosquitoes buzzed through open windows. Flies sometimes found their way inside before sunset. People waved them away as best they could, though perfect solutions were rare.
In wealthier homes, fine curtains occasionally surrounded the bed. These offered a small measure of protection against insects while also creating a little privacy. Simple nets existed in some regions of the world, particularly where mosquitoes carried disease, although they were not common everywhere. Daily routines also changed with the seasons.
During summer, people often rose before sunrise to complete heavy work while temperatures remained cool. Midday heat encouraged short periods of rest. By evening, the body welcomed sleep after long hours spent in fields beneath the sun. Winter brought the opposite pattern. Long nights naturally encouraged more time in bed, even if actual sleep was interrupted. Modern researchers have found that before widespread electric lighting, many people likely spent more total time resting during winter than they do today. Nature quietly shaped human schedules, not clocks, not calendars, simply the rising and setting of the sun. Looking back, it is remarkable how adaptable our ancestors were. Without machines to control their environment, they learned to adjust themselves instead. They changed clothing, they changed bedding, they changed daily routines. Rather than expecting nature to become comfortable, they became comfortable with nature. As another peaceful night passes, the family sleeps beneath stars hidden behind drifting clouds. Some dream quietly, others stir beneath thick blankets. The fire has almost disappeared now, leaving only a faint red glow beneath soft ashes. But not every problem can be solved by warm blankets or cool evening breezes.
The cottage is quiet once again. Outside, the moon hangs high above the village, casting a pale silver glow across empty fields. Inside, the family sleeps peacefully beneath thick blankets, their slow breathing blending with the occasional crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. At first glance, everything seems calm. But hidden in the darkness, another world is beginning to stir. Long before electricity, people did not sleep alone. Not because they shared their beds with family, but because countless tiny creatures shared them too. These unwelcome companions had lived alongside humans for thousands of years, making peaceful sleep far more difficult than most of us can imagine today. Perhaps the most famous of these nighttime visitors was the bedbug. Despite its tiny size, the bedbug became one of history's most persistent household pests. During the day, it hid deep inside wooden bed frames, cracks in walls, woven mattresses, and folds of cloth. Its flat body allowed it to squeeze into spaces barely wider than a sheet of paper. As darkness settled and the room became still, the insect slowly emerged. Guided by warmth and the carbon dioxide in human breath, they quietly crawled towards sleeping people. Most victims never noticed them. The bites themselves were usually painless at first. Only the itching came later. Morning often revealed small red marks across arms, necks, or hands. For families living centuries ago, these bites were simply part of everyday life. No one enjoyed them, yet few people could completely avoid them.
Mattresses filled with straw created ideal hiding places. Wooden furniture contained endless tiny cracks. Blankets were difficult to wash frequently, especially during winter. Without modern insect treatments, controlling infestations required constant effort. Families regularly carried straw mattresses outdoors. They beat them with sticks to remove dust and insects. Fresh air and direct sunlight helped reduce unwanted pests,
although rarely eliminated them completely. When the straw became too old, it was thrown away and replaced with fresh material. This simple task improved both comfort and cleanliness. But bedbugs were only one problem. Fleas were equally common. These tiny jumping insects often arrived with household animals. Dogs slept beside the fire. Cats wandered freely through the house hunting mice. Livestock sometimes shared the same building during harsh winters. While this arrangement kept animals warm and protected them from thieves, it also brought insects much closer to people. A single flea could leap astonishing distances despite its tiny body. Once inside blankets or clothing, it became difficult to catch. Many nights were interrupted by constant scratching. Lice created another challenge. Unlike fleas, lice lived directly on clothing or hair. Regular washing of linen garments helped reduce them, which is one reason people often changed and cleaned their underclothes whenever possible. Contrary to popular myths, medieval people did care about cleanliness. The difficulty was not a lack of concern, it was a lack of convenient resources. Heating large amounts of water required time and firewood. Soap remained expensive in many places. Daily bathing was simply impractical for ordinary families. Still, people washed when they could. They brushed their hair. They cleaned their clothing. They aired blankets. Good hygiene was valued, even if it looked different from modern habits. Smoke presented another hidden enemy. Although the fireplace gave warmth and light, it also filled many homes with fine particles carried through the air. In cottages without proper chimneys, smoke lingered inside for hours. Eyes stung, throats became dry, breathing grew uncomfortable. Some historians believe long-term exposure contributed to chronic lung problems among many people. Yet there was little alternative. Without the fire, families faced freezing temperatures and uncooked food. They accepted smoke as part of everyday life. The darkness itself created additional challenges. If someone awoke during the night needing water or wishing to step outside, even a familiar room could become hazardous. A misplaced stool, a forgotten bucket, a sleeping dog stretched across the floor. Any of these could cause a painful fall.
Carrying a candle reduced the danger, but introduced another. An open flame inside a wooden house always demanded caution. Many people simply memorized every corner of their homes. After years of living in the same small cottage, they could move confidently even in near total darkness. Rodents also visited many households. Mice searched for stored grain. Rats entered barns and kitchens whenever food was available. Besides damaging supplies, they carried fleas and spread disease. Cats became treasured members of many families for this very reason. A skilled mouser protected precious food while reducing unwanted visitors. Their quiet nighttime patrols often continued while everyone else slept. Yet despite all these challenges, our ancestors still found ways to rest. They accepted that complete comfort was impossible. Life before electricity was closely connected to nature. Along with fresh air, quiet nights, and brilliant stars came insects, smoke, cold, and countless small inconveniences. Perhaps what is most remarkable is not how uncomfortable their nights could sometimes be, it is how adaptable people became. Instead of expecting perfect sleeping conditions, they learned to live with the imperfections around them. A little itching, a little smoke, a cold draft beneath the door. These were ordinary parts of life. As the hours pass, the cottage grows even quieter. Most of the family remains asleep. But before long, something unexpected will happen. Several members of the household will slowly awaken, not because of danger, nor because of insects.
Instead, they will wake quite naturally in the middle of the night. They may whisper a few words, say a prayer, check the fire, or simply sit quietly in the darkness before returning to bed once more. To modern ears, this sounds unusual, yet for centuries it may have been one of the most normal sleeping habits in the world. That fascinating mystery awaits us in the next chapter. The night is now at its deepest. The fire has almost disappeared, leaving only a faint red glow beneath the ashes. Outside, the moon has slipped behind a blanket of clouds, and the village is wrapped in complete darkness. For a few peaceful moments, everything is silent. Then, a floorboard creaks. A dog barks somewhere beyond the wooden fence. The wind gently rattles the shutters. Nothing unusual has happened. Yet, if you lived hundreds of years ago, your heart might begin to beat just a little faster. For most of human history, darkness was not simply inconvenient, it was deeply mysterious. Today, if we hear a strange sound outside, we might switch on a porch light, glance through a security camera, or look out of a brightly lit window. Our ancestors had none of these comforts. Once the candle was extinguished, the darkness became almost complete. A person could barely see a few steps ahead. Every sound seemed louder. Every shadow appeared larger. The imagination quietly filled in what the eyes could not. For people living before electricity, fear after dark was often rooted in very real dangers. Wild animals were among the greatest concerns. Across medieval Europe, wolves still roamed many forests. Foxes searched for chickens. Wild boars wandered through woodlands. In some regions, bears remained a genuine threat. Most of these animals avoided people whenever possible. But livestock left outside overnight could attract hungry predators.
This is one reason barns were carefully secured before sunset. Dogs became invaluable guardians. Their hearing was sharper than any human's. A barking dog could warn a household long before anyone else noticed approaching danger. Yet animals were only one source of fear. Human beings could be even more dangerous. Travel after sunset was risky. Roads were poorly maintained. There were no streetlights to guide travelers safely. Bandits sometimes waited along lonely paths, knowing that darkness made escape much easier. Merchants carrying valuable goods usually planned their journeys to reach towns before nightfall. Even local villagers avoided unnecessary travel after dark. City gates often closed at sunset. Anyone arriving late might find themselves locked outside until morning. Within villages, neighbors looked after one another. A strange figure walking through the streets at midnight immediately attracted attention. Night watchmen patrolled many towns, carrying lanterns, staves, or simple weapons. They called out the passing hours and watched for fires, thieves, or disturbances. Their voices drifting through empty streets reassured sleeping families that someone remained awake. But not every fear came from real dangers. Many came from belief. Before scientific explanations became common, people often understood the unknown through stories. Dark forests became homes to mysterious spirits.
Old ruins were said to be haunted. Lonely crossroads carried unsettling legends. In different parts of Europe, people spoke of ghosts wandering after midnight.
Some believed witches traveled beneath the moon. Others warned children about supernatural creatures that punished those who stayed outside too late. Whether these tales were literally believed or simply respected as tradition varied from place to place. But they influenced daily life. Parents often reminded children to return home before darkness. Travelers paused at roadside shrines to offer a quiet prayer. Families placed religious symbols above their doors, believing they offered protection throughout the night. Elsewhere in the world, different cultures developed their own nighttime traditions. In China, stories spoke of wandering spirits during certain festivals. Across the Islamic world, nighttime prayers brought comfort and reminded believers that God watched over every hour of the day and night. In many indigenous cultures, the stars themselves became guides, ancestors, or storytellers whose patterns carried meaning across generations. Although the beliefs differed, one idea remained remarkably similar. Night deserved respect. Darkness invited caution. Interestingly, the human brain naturally becomes more alert when vision is limited. A small sound that would go unnoticed during daylight suddenly captures our full attention at night. This instinct helped our ancestors survive. Being cautious after sunset often meant living to see another sunrise. Fear, in moderation, served a purpose.
Yet darkness was not only frightening, it could also be peaceful. Far from the noise of modern cities, the night possessed a remarkable stillness. Without traffic, without glowing signs, without aircraft crossing the sky, people could hear leaves moving in distant trees, the soft flow of a nearby stream, the quiet breathing of family members asleep beside them. Many found comfort in these familiar sounds. After evening prayers, they entrusted the night to God, to fate, or simply to the natural order of the world. Eventually, tiredness overcame worry. Eyes closed, breathing slowed. The house settled once more into silence. Outside, the stars continued their patient journey across the heavens. Inside, most people drifted into peaceful sleep. But their night was not necessarily over. Unlike many of us today, countless people throughout history did not expect to sleep straight through until morning. In fact, waking in the middle of the night was often considered perfectly normal. People even had names for these two separate periods of sleep. And that forgotten rhythm, one shared by millions before electric light changed human life forever, is the fascinating story we will explore next.
The village is completely still. Hours have passed since everyone climbed beneath their blankets. The moon now hangs high above the rooftops, bathing the fields in a gentle silver light. Inside the cottage, the fire has almost disappeared, leaving only a faint orange glow hidden beneath the ashes. Most of the family has been asleep for several hours. Then, quite naturally, someone opens their eyes. There is no loud noise, no nightmare, no emergency. They simply wake up. Today, many people would worry if this happened. After all, modern advice often tells us that a good night's sleep should be one long, uninterrupted stretch. But for much of human history, that was not always the case. Historians have uncovered fascinating evidence suggesting that before electric lighting became widespread,
many people regularly slept in two separate periods. The first was commonly called the first sleep. The second became known as the second sleep. Between them came a quiet period of wakefulness that could last anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. This may sound surprising, yet for centuries it appears to have been an ordinary part of nightly life. Evidence comes from many different sources. Medieval prayer books mention people rising after their first sleep to pray. Doctors wrote about patients returning to bed after a peaceful period awake. Poems, personal letters, court records, and even works of literature casually referred to the first sleep, as though everyone understood exactly what it meant. No explanation was necessary. It was simply normal.
Imagine waking around midnight in a small cottage. The room is almost silent. The fire still glows softly. Outside, the stars shine brighter than you have ever seen in the modern world. Instead of feeling anxious, you remain perfectly calm. You know this quiet moment is part of the night's natural rhythm. Perhaps you sit beside a fire for a few minutes. You gently stir the glowing embers, adding a small piece of wood if needed. Maybe you drink a little water from a clay cup. Some people quietly spoke with family members who were also awake. Others reflected on the events of the day. Many simply enjoyed the peaceful silence. Religious devotion often filled this time. Monks followed nighttime prayer schedules that divided the darkness into sacred hours. Ordinary families sometimes whispered short prayers before returning to bed. The middle of the night felt deeply peaceful. There was no pressure to hurry, no clock demanding productivity, only silence. Some historical records even suggest that husbands and wives often used this quiet interval to talk privately, strengthening family relationships in ways that busy daylight rarely allowed. The house itself seems suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Outside, the world rested. Inside, the mind remained unusually calm. Why did this pattern develop? Modern researchers believe it was closely connected to natural light. Without electric lamps keeping people awake late into the evening, many
went to bed only a few hours after sunset. During winter, this meant spending 12 or even 14 hours between dusk and dawn. Sleeping continuously for such a long period may not have matched the body's natural rhythm. Instead, the body divided sleep into two comfortable sections. Scientific studies conducted in recent decades have produced intriguing results. When volunteers lived for several weeks without artificial evening light, some gradually began developing a similar pattern. Many fell asleep shortly after sunset, woke naturally in the middle of the night for a peaceful period, and then drifted into a second period of sleep before sunrise. These experiments suggest that segmented sleep may be an ancient human rhythm rather than an unusual habit. Of course, not everyone everywhere followed exactly the same schedule. Climate, occupation, religion, and culture all influenced nightly routines. A fisherman preparing for an early tide slept differently from a monk observing midnight prayers. A shepherd guarding animals experienced different nights than a merchant resting inside a city inn. Human history has never been identical for everyone. Still, the idea of two sleeps appears in enough historical sources that many historians believe it was once remarkably common. Eventually, however, this pattern began to change. As towns became brighter with gas lamps, as factories demanded fixed working hours, And finally, as electric lighting turned night into an extension of the day, people stayed awake later than their ancestors ever had. The long hours of darkness became shorter. The quiet pause between first and second sleep slowly disappeared. Within only a few generations, segmented sleep faded from everyday life.
Today, if someone wakes naturally in the middle of the night, they may immediately worry that something is wrong. Yet centuries ago, their ancestors might simply have smiled, listened to the gentle crackling of the fire, whispered a short prayer, and waited peacefully until sleep returned once more. Perhaps our bodies still remember that older rhythm, even if our modern lives rarely allow it. The stars continue their silent journey overhead. The fire grows warm again. One by one, everyone in the cottage closes their eyes. The second sleep begins. And before long, the first light of dawn will appear on the eastern horizon. But while most families rest peacefully, someone else has remained awake throughout the entire night. Walking slowly through dark streets with a lantern in hand, listening for danger and watching over sleeping neighbors. Their quiet duty is the story of our next chapter.
The second sleep has settled gently over the village. Behind wooden doors, families rest beneath thick blankets. The fire in each cottage has faded into glowing embers, and only the occasional creak of old timber breaks the silence. Most people are asleep, but not everyone. Outside, beneath the sky filled with countless stars, a lone figure walks slowly along the empty street. In one hand he carries a lantern, in the other a sturdy wooden staff. His footsteps echo softly against the cobblestones as he pauses at every corner, listening carefully to the sounds of the sleeping town. This is the night watchman. Long before electricity illuminated streets with bright lamps and security cameras watched every doorway, communities relied upon ordinary men whose responsibility was simple yet enormously important. They stayed awake so everyone else could sleep. The job of a night watchman was far more difficult than it might first appear. Darkness concealed almost everything. A small fire beginning inside a distant home could quickly grow into a disaster before anyone noticed. A thief slipping through an alley could disappear into the shadows within seconds. A stranger entering the town after midnight might bring news, seek shelter, or pose a genuine threat. The watchman had to remain alert throughout the entire night. Many towns divided the darkness into several watches. Different men worked different hours, handing over responsibility as the night progressed. In smaller villages, the duty sometimes rotated among local residents. Every household contributed when its turn arrived. Protecting the community became everyone's responsibility. To reassure sleeping families, watchmen often called out the passing hours. Imagine lying beneath a wool blanket in complete darkness.
Outside, you suddenly hear a familiar voice. 2 o'clock, and all is well. An hour later, 3 o'clock, and all is well. These announcements served several purposes. They proved the watchman remained awake. They warned criminals that someone was patrolling the streets, and they comforted anyone lying awake during the long hours before dawn. The exact words varied from place to place. Some towns included weather reports. Others reminded citizens to keep their fires safely covered. A watchman's voice became one of the most familiar sounds of the night. Fire was perhaps the greatest danger he faced. Most homes were built from wood. Roofs were often covered with straw or thatch. Every household relied upon candles, oil lamps, or open fireplaces. One overturned candle, one forgotten ember, one gust of wind carrying sparks onto a dry roof, that was all it could take. Entire neighborhoods had disappeared beneath flames in only a few terrible hours. If a watchman spotted smoke, he acted immediately. Church bells rang loudly through the darkness. Residents rushed from their beds carrying buckets of water. Neighbors formed long lines from wells and rivers, passing heavy buckets hand to hand. There were no professional fire engines, no emergency telephone numbers. Saving the town depended entirely upon cooperation. The watchman also listened carefully for unusual sounds: breaking wood, running footsteps, a frightened horse.
An argument growing louder in the distance. His ears often detected danger before his eyes could. Lanterns helped, but they illuminated only a small circle around his feet. Beyond that narrow pool of light lay darkness. Many watchmen carried whistles, horns, or handbells. These simple tools quickly alerted nearby residents if assistance became necessary. Sometimes the greatest challenge was simply remaining awake. Imagine walking slowly through freezing winter streets while nearly everyone else slept comfortably indoors. The night seemed endless. The cold crept through heavy clothing. Silence surrounded every step. Remaining alert required remarkable discipline. Not every watchman succeeded. Historical records occasionally mention guards caught sleeping while on duty. The consequences could be severe, especially if theft or fire occurred during their watch. In larger cities such as London, Paris, or Florence, organized night patrols gradually became more common. As populations grew, protecting crowded streets required greater coordination. Some watchmen worked in pairs, others carried simple weapons for protection. Yet despite these improvements, their equipment remained basic. A lantern, a staff, a sharp eye, and experience gained through countless nights beneath the stars. Outside Europe, similar traditions developed across the world. In many Islamic cities, guards walked narrow streets while announcing the hours and watching for danger.
Across imperial China, city gates closed at night, while patrols monitored walls and marketplaces until sunrise. In Japan, during the Edo period, neighborhood groups shared responsibility for preventing fires, one of the greatest dangers in tightly packed wooden towns. Although customs differed, the purpose remained the same: to protect sleeping communities until morning arrived. Dogs often became the watchman's greatest allies. Long before human ears detected approaching footsteps, village dogs began barking. Experienced guards learned to recognize the difference between ordinary barking and sounds that suggested genuine trouble. Animals noticed what darkness concealed. As the hours slowly passed, the eastern horizon finally began to lighten. The deepest darkness gave way to soft shades of gray. Birds sang their first songs. Roosters announced the coming day. The watchman's long shift was nearly over. Another peaceful night had passed. Most families would never know how many quiet patrols had taken place outside their doors while they slept, and perhaps that was the greatest measure of success. When nothing happened, the watchman had done his job well. Soon the village would awaken. Smoke would rise once more from countless chimneys.
Farmers would return to their fields. Children would begin another day. But before sunrise fully arrived, many travelers were only just beginning to search for a place to rest after long journeys through the night. Their experience of sleep was very different from that of families safely tucked inside their own homes. And that is where our journey continues next.
As the first pale light of dawn begins to touch the eastern horizon, the village slowly awakens. Roosters crow from nearby farms. Thin streams of smoke begin rising from cottage chimneys as families prepare another day's breakfast. The night watchman finally returns home after hours of quiet patrol, grateful that the town has passed another peaceful night. But not everyone has the comfort of waking in their own bed. Far beyond the village gates, dusty roads stretch across forests, rivers, mountains, and endless countryside. Along these roads walk merchants carrying valuable goods, pilgrims traveling towards distant holy places, messengers delivering urgent letters, soldiers marching between kingdoms, scholars seeking knowledge, and ordinary people simply hoping for a better life somewhere beyond the horizon. For these travelers, every evening brought the same important question: where will I sleep tonight? Unlike today, there were no hotels waiting at every crossroads, no online reservations, no glowing signs promising vacancy. Finding a safe place to spend the night required planning, luck, and sometimes the kindness of complete strangers. Most experienced travelers planned their journeys around daylight. They knew that once darkness arrived, the road became far more dangerous. Uneven paths disappeared into blackness. Wooden bridges became difficult to cross. Bandits sometimes waited where lonely roads passed through forests or narrow valleys. Whenever possible, travelers aimed to reach a village before sunset. If fortune smiled upon them, they might find an inn. These inns varied greatly.
Some were comfortable buildings with several rooms, warm meals, and clean straw mattresses. Others were little more than crowded houses where exhausted travelers accepted whatever space remained. Luxury was rare. Shelter was enough. As evening approached, horses were led into nearby stables. Merchants carefully unloaded valuable goods from wagons. Travelers removed dusty boots that had carried them many miles over rough roads. The smell of fresh bread, vegetable stew, roasted meat, and wood smoke welcomed weary guests inside. For someone who had spent the entire day walking beneath the sun or through cold rain, even a simple meal could feel unforgettable. The common room quickly became the heart of the inn. People from many different places gathered around long wooden tables. Some spoke familiar languages. Others came from lands hundreds of miles away. Stories flowed as freely as the drinks. A merchant described the crowded markets of a distant city. A sailor spoke about violent storms at sea. A pilgrim shared tales of magnificent churches and sacred shrines. For many people, inns became places where news spread across entire kingdoms. Long before newspapers or radio existed, conversations carried information from one town to another. But as pleasant as the evening could be, bedtime often surprised first-time visitors. Private rooms were uncommon, beds were expensive, space was limited. Instead, several strangers frequently shared the same bed. 4 adults might sleep together beneath one blanket, sometimes even more. To modern travelers, this sounds almost unimaginable, yet centuries ago it was accepted as perfectly ordinary. People simply climbed into bed, wished one another a peaceful night, and tried to rest after a long day's journey. Not every traveler found an inn. Some sought shelter inside monasteries. Across much of medieval Europe, many monasteries welcomed pilgrims and weary travelers.
The accommodations were usually simple but clean. Guests often received bread, soup, and a safe place to sleep in exchange for respectful behavior. The quiet surroundings offered something many inns could not: peace. The sound of monks softly chanting evening prayers echoed through stone corridors before silence settled over the buildings. For countless travelers, these religious communities provided comfort during uncertain journeys. Others relied upon pure hospitality. In many villages across Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, welcoming strangers was considered an important moral duty. Families sometimes invited travelers into their homes, offering a warm meal and a place beside the fire. These generous acts created friendships that lasted for years. Of course, hospitality also required caution. Hosts wanted to help honest travelers, but they also needed to protect their own families. Trust was earned slowly. Unfortunately, not every journey ended safely. Storms could force travelers to sleep beneath trees or inside abandoned buildings. Some rested in caves. Others built small campfires beneath the open sky. These nights demanded courage. The sounds of distant wolves, the rustling of unseen animals, the cold wind moving through dark forests. Every unfamiliar sound reminded travelers that they were far from home. Weather often became their greatest enemy. Heavy rain soaked blankets. Strong winds extinguished campfires. Winter snow covered roads and made sleeping outdoors extremely dangerous.
Many journeys paused entirely until conditions improved. Those who traveled during harsh weather accepted enormous risks. Yet despite every hardship, people continued to travel. Trade connected distant cities. Pilgrimages strengthened faith. Messengers carried royal commands. Families searched for new opportunities beyond familiar villages. The roads never remained empty for long. As another evening slowly approaches, travelers once again search the horizon for rising chimney smoke, hoping it marks another welcoming village. A warm fire, a bowl of hot stew, a dry blanket, perhaps even a crowded bed shared with strangers. After walking 20 or 30 miles in a single day, such simple comforts felt like extraordinary luxuries. While ordinary travelers accepted crowded inns and humble shelters, there were others whose nights looked very different. Behind towering stone walls and guarded gates, kings, queens, nobles, and wealthy families prepared for sleep in magnificent castles and grand palaces. Yet despite all their riches, they too remained dependent upon candles, fireplaces, and the setting of the sun. That is where our journey continues next.
As evening settles once more across the land, the roads become quiet again. The last travelers hurry toward nearby inns, farmers close the gate to their fields, and smoke rises gently from village chimneys. But tonight, instead of following ordinary families into their simple cottages, let us step through the towering gates of a medieval castle. Its thick stone walls stand high above the surrounding countryside. Torches flicker along the battlements. Armed guards slowly patrol the walls, watching the fading light disappear beyond the horizon. At first glance, life inside a castle seems unimaginably luxurious. Grand halls stretch beneath towering wooden beams. Rich tapestries cover cold stone walls. Massive fireplaces burn throughout the evening. Golden candle holders illuminate long banquet tables. Yet despite this wealth, nighttime inside a castle was not always as comfortable as we might imagine. Stone is strong. It protects against enemies, but it is also remarkably cold. Throughout the winter months, castle walls absorbed the chill of the outside air. Even with enormous fireplaces burning for hours, many rooms remained damp and cold. The larger the room, the harder it was to keep warm.
kings and queens certainly enjoyed more comfort than ordinary villagers. Their beds were masterpieces of craftsmanship. Large wooden frames supported thick feather mattresses. Fine linen sheets covered soft bedding. Heavy wool blankets and luxurious fur throws provided warmth during freezing nights. Many royal beds featured magnificent curtains hanging from carved wooden posts. These curtains were not merely decorative. They trapped warm air around the bed while shielding sleepers from cold drafts that drifted through narrow windows and stone corridors. In many castles, servants prepared the royal bed long before bedtime.
Fresh sheets were carefully arranged. Blankets were shaken free of dust. Sometimes warming pans filled with glowing coals were passed beneath the covers to remove the evening chill. By the time the king or queen retired, the bed felt warm and inviting. Yet comfort had its limits. Fireplaces heated only part of the room. Beyond their glow, the air remained surprisingly cold. On winter mornings, servants sometimes found thin layers of ice forming inside poorly heated chambers. Even the wealthiest nobles occasionally slept wearing linen caps or additional clothing to stay warm. Privacy also looked very different from modern expectations. Although rulers possessed private bedchambers, they were rarely alone. Trusted servants entered to prepare clothing. Ladies-in-waiting assisted queens. Personal attendants remained nearby throughout the night. Guards stood outside the chamber doors. Royal physicians could be summoned at any hour. Life inside a palace was constantly surrounded by people. For medieval rulers, complete solitude was uncommon. Nighttime also followed a carefully organized routine. After the evening meal, musicians sometimes performed gentle melodies. Guests enjoyed quiet conversation around the fire. Important political discussions occasionally continued long after sunset, illuminated by dozens of expensive beeswax candles. Eventually, however, even castles surrendered to darkness. Candles cost money. Firewood required labor. No household, no matter how wealthy, wasted these precious resources unnecessarily. One by one, servants extinguished the flames. The great halls grew quiet. Only guards remained awake along the walls. Elsewhere across Europe, another very different kind of building welcomed the coming night.
The monastery. Far removed from royal luxury, monasteries offered a life built upon simplicity, discipline, and prayer. As darkness approached, bells echoed across peaceful courtyards. Monks quietly finished their evening prayers before returning to modest sleeping quarters. Unlike noble bedrooms, monastic dormitories were intentionally plain. Many monks slept in long shared rooms. Simple wooden beds stood side by side. Each bed held little more than a straw mattress, a wool blanket, and perhaps a small pillow. Luxury was considered a distraction from spiritual life. Silence became one of the monastery's greatest treasures. After evening prayers, conversation usually ended. The only sounds were soft footsteps, distant bells, and the gentle whisper of wind through ancient stone buildings. Night did not always mean uninterrupted sleep. Many religious communities followed schedules that required waking before dawn or even during the middle of the night for additional prayers. A bell quietly echoed through the monastery. One by one, monks rose from their beds. Still wrapped in heavy robes against the cold, they walked silently through dark corridors towards the chapel. Hundreds of candles illuminated the sacred space. Ancient prayers filled the stillness before everyone returned once more to their beds. These nightly rituals continued year after year, generation after generation. Outside the monastery walls,
the world slept. Inside, the rhythm of prayer continued without interruption. Whether inside a humble village cottage, a crowded roadside inn, a magnificent royal palace, or a peaceful monastery, one truth united everyone before electricity. Night demanded adaptation. No one could simply press a switch and banish the darkness. Every household depended upon fire. Every family measured time by the setting sun.
Every sleeper accepted that nature, not technology, would shape the hours of rest. As dawn slowly approaches once again, the bells of distant churches begin to ring across fields and villages. Farmers prepare their tools, merchants gather their goods, kings meet their advisors, monks finish their morning prayers. Another day is about to begin. But while castles and monasteries each followed their own traditions, most of humanity lived much simpler lives. In small villages scattered across the countryside, farmers rose with the first light of morning and followed a rhythm that had changed very little for centuries. Their peaceful nights and the demanding days that surrounded them will be the story of our next chapter.
Morning arrives quietly over the countryside. A soft mist hangs above the fields as the first rays of sunlight peek over the distant hills. Dew sparkles on blades of grass, birds begin their cheerful songs, and somewhere nearby, a rooster announces the start of another day. For the people living in small villages, this sound was far more reliable than any alarm clock. For thousands of years, farmers lived according to one simple schedule. The sun decided everything. When daylight appeared, work began. When darkness returned, work ended. This natural rhythm shaped not only their days, but also the way they slept. Unlike kings in grand castles or merchants traveling busy roads, most people throughout history were farmers. Nearly every village depended on the land for survival. Each season brought different responsibilities. Spring meant planting. Summer required endless hours of tending crops. Autumn was filled with harvesting before winter arrived. Winter offered a brief chance to repair tools, weave clothing, and prepare for another growing season. Because so much physical labor filled the day, bedtime rarely required much effort. After 12 or 14 hours of digging, carrying water, chopping wood, feeding animals, and working beneath the sun, exhaustion arrived naturally. There was no need for sleep-inducing music, no herbal supplements.
No glowing screens keeping tired minds awake. The body simply rested when it was ready. As evening approached, farmers hurried to complete one final round of chores. Cows were brought into their barns. Goats and sheep were safely gathered inside fenced enclosures. Chickens climbed onto their wooden roosts for the night. A final bucket of water might be carried from the village well. Firewood was stacked beside the hearth. Only then could the family turn its attention towards supper and rest. The evening meal was usually simple but filling. Fresh bread baked earlier in the day, a thick vegetable stew, cheese made from goats' or cow's milk, perhaps smoked fish or salted pork if the family had been fortunate. Nothing was wasted. Every ingredient represented countless hours of hard work. After supper, neighbors sometimes visited one another. Without electricity, social life naturally centered around conversation rather than entertainment. People shared news about the weather. They discussed harvests. Children played quietly, while older villagers exchanged stories that had been passed from one generation to the next. On clear nights, these gatherings often moved outdoors during the warmer months. families sat beneath skies filled with stars brighter than most of us will ever see today. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a glowing ribbon. Many children grew up recognizing constellations before they ever learned to read. For farmers, the night sky was more than beautiful. It was useful. The changing position of familiar stars helped mark the passing seasons. The moon influenced nighttime travel and, in some traditions, even guided the timing of planting or harvesting certain crops. Whether every belief was scientifically accurate mattered less than the close relationship people felt with the natural world. The weather also shaped sleep. During hot summer nights, many villagers left small windows open to welcome cool breezes. Some even slept outdoors for part of the night when conditions allowed. In Mediterranean regions and warmer climates, rooftops, courtyards, or shaded terraces sometimes became peaceful places to sleep beneath the stars. During harsh winters, however, life looked very different. The entire family gathered close to the fireplace after sunset. Heavy wool blankets covered every bed. Sometimes several generations slept within the same room, sharing warmth through the long, freezing hours. Body heat became as valuable as firewood. Village life also encouraged cooperation. If one family's chimney caught fire, neighbors rushed to help. If wolves threatened livestock, the entire community responded. This same spirit extended into the night. People listened for familiar sounds. A barking dog, a church bell, the footsteps of the night watchman in larger villages. These ordinary noises reassured everyone that life continued peacefully beyond their doors. Although nights were usually calm, they were not always quiet. Babies cried. Cows mooed inside nearby barns. Wind rattled wooden shutters. Rain drummed softly against thatched roofs. Every season brought its own soundtrack. Unlike modern homes sealed behind thick insulation and constant background noise, medieval cottages remained deeply connected to the sounds of nature. Perhaps that connection made sleep feel different. People drifted off listening to frogs near ponds, owls calling through forests, or gentle rain nourishing tomorrow's crops. Nature itself became the lullaby. The village also followed a shared rhythm. Nearly everyone woke around the same time. Nearly everyone rested around the same time. Without electric lighting separating one household schedule from another, entire communities moved together like a single heartbeat. Sunrise awakened the village. Sunset invited rest. Looking back, there is something quietly comforting about this simple way of life. It was physically demanding, often uncertain, sometimes dangerous. Yet it remained closely connected to the natural cycles that had guided humanity since prehistoric times. As evening falls once again, smoke curls gently from cottage chimneys. Children grow sleepy beside the fire. Parents quietly prepare tomorrow's tools. Outside, the stars begin appearing one by one above silent fields. But before every family closes its eyes, many pause for one final moment. Some whisper a prayer. Some think about dreams. Others wonder whether the visions that come during sleep might carry hidden meaning. For our ancestors, dreams were often far more than random images. They could be messages, warnings, or signs from a world beyond the waking one. That mysterious belief is where our journey continues next.
The village has fallen asleep once again. The last candle has been extinguished. Only a few glowing embers remain beneath the ashes, casting a soft orange light across the quiet room.
Outside, countless stars sparkle above the sleeping countryside, while the moon slowly makes its silent journey across the sky. Inside the cottage, everyone is resting. Their breathing is slow. Their faces are peaceful. And somewhere deep within their sleeping minds, dreams begin. For as long as human beings have slept, they have wondered about dreams. Why do they come? What do they mean? Can they reveal the future? Or are they simply stories created by the sleeping mind? Long before modern science attempted to answer these questions, nearly every civilization developed its own beliefs about dreams. To many people, dreams were far more than imagination. They were messages. Across medieval Europe, dreams often carried deep religious meaning. Many Christians believed that certain dreams could be sent by God as guidance, encouragement, or warning. Stories from the Bible described important dreams experienced by kings, prophets, and ordinary believers alike. These sacred stories encouraged many people to pay close attention to what they saw while asleep. At the same time, religious leaders also advised caution. Not every dream was considered meaningful. Many were thought to arise simply from everyday worries, illness, or an overactive imagination. Discerning the difference required wisdom.
Elsewhere in the Islamic world, dreams were also treated with great respect. Some dreams were believed to contain spiritual insight, while others reflected ordinary thoughts from daily life. Scholars carefully discussed different kinds of dreams, encouraging believers to approach them thoughtfully rather than fearfully. In ancient China, dreams sometimes reflected the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. Certain philosophers suggested that the soul wandered while the body rested. Upon waking, people occasionally wondered where their spirit had traveled during the night. Across many indigenous cultures, dreams became bridges between generations. Ancestors offered guidance. Animals appeared as teachers. Natural landscapes carried symbolic meaning. These traditions differed greatly from one community to another, yet they shared a common belief. The sleeping mind could reveal truths hidden from waking eyes. Dream interpretation became an important skill in many societies. Wise elders, religious leaders, healers, sometimes even members of one's own family, helped explain unusual dreams. A dream about water, a dream about birds, a dream about losing one's way. Each image might carry different meanings depending upon local customs. Whether these interpretations proved correct mattered less than the comfort they often provided. Dreams also inspired creativity. Poets remembered beautiful visions upon waking. Artists transformed strange dreamlike images into paintings and carvings. Musicians found melodies that seemed to arrive during sleep. Even great scientific ideas have occasionally been connected to dreams throughout history. The boundary between sleeping and waking has always fascinated humanity. Night itself strengthened these beliefs. Without electric lights washing away the darkness, evenings felt deeply mysterious. The stars appeared brilliantly clear. The moon illuminated forests with soft silver light. Mist drifted across quiet fields. Every shadow invited the imagination to wander. It is easy to understand why ancient people viewed nighttime as something almost magical. Before bedtime, many families followed comforting rituals. Parents whispered evening prayers with their children. Some thanked God for protection throughout the day. Others prayed for peaceful sleep and pleasant dreams. Simple wooden crosses hung above many beds in Christian homes. Elsewhere, different symbols offered similar reassurance according to local traditions. These quiet rituals helped replace fear with hope. Even children found comfort knowing that someone greater watched over them through the darkness. not every belief centered upon comfort. Throughout history, many cultures also warned against nightmares. A frightening dream might be remembered for weeks. Some believed evil spirits caused terrifying visions. Others blame illness, worry, or emotional distress. To protect themselves, families sometimes placed religious objects near the bed or recited familiar prayers before closing their eyes. Modern medicine explains nightmares very differently.
Yet the emotional experience remains remarkably similar across time. Fear during sleep has always felt real to the dreamer. Interestingly, the absence of electric light may also have influenced dreaming itself. People often spent longer hours resting during winter. Many experienced segmented sleep, waking peacefully between their first and second sleep. These long, quiet nights provided more opportunities to remember dreams before morning arrived. Upon waking, some quietly shared their dreams with family over breakfast. Others kept them private. Some forgot them before the day's work had even begun. Dreams came and went like clouds drifting across the morning sky. Perhaps that is part of their enduring mystery. No matter how carefully we study sleep today, dreams continue to surprise us. They remain one of the most fascinating experiences shared by every generation of humanity. As the final hours of darkness slowly pass, the stars begin fading, one by one. The eastern sky grows slightly brighter. Soon, another familiar sound will echo across the village. Not the ringing of a smartphone, not the buzzing of an alarm clock, but the crow of a rooster, the tolling of church bells, or perhaps the gentle knock of a man whose unusual profession existed for one remarkable purpose. His job was simply to wake sleeping people before sunrise. Before clocks sat upon bedside tables, entire communities relied upon surprisingly creative ways to begin a new day. That forgotten world of waking without alarm clocks is the story waiting for us in the next chapter.
The night is drawing to a close. The stars that filled the sky only a few hours ago are beginning to fade. A cool breeze moves quietly through the village, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh grass. Most families are still asleep. The fire has almost gone out. Only a few glowing embers remain beneath the ashes, patiently waiting to be stirred back to life. Then, from somewhere beyond the cottages, a rooster crows. Its call echoes across the fields, cutting gently through the silence of the early morning. Another rooster answers from a neighboring farm. Soon another joins in. Long before alarm clocks existed, this familiar chorus became nature's own wake-up call. For farming communities around the world, the rooster was one of the most reliable signals that dawn had arrived. Of course, roosters were not always perfectly accurate. Sometimes they crowed too early, sometimes several times before sunrise. But after hearing the same sounds every morning for years, people naturally learned when it was truly time to begin the day. The rising sun itself remained the greatest timekeeper. As the first light entered tiny windows, sleeping bodies slowly responded. Human eyes are remarkably sensitive to natural light. Even before electricity, this daily rhythm quietly guided the body's internal clock. Without bright lamps delaying bedtime, many people naturally awoke close to sunrise. There was no loud ringing, no vibrating phone, simply light. Another common morning signal came from church bells. Across much of medieval Europe, church towers overlooked villages and towns alike. Their bells marked important moments throughout the day: before dawn, at sunrise,
at midday, and again in the evening.
The sound carried remarkable distances across open countryside. Farmers working in distant fields could often hear the bells drifting over hills and rivers. For many communities, the bells provided a shared sense of time long before personal clocks became affordable. Elsewhere in the world, different traditions served the same purpose. In many Islamic cities, the beautiful call to the morning prayer echoed before sunrise, gently awakening neighborhoods as a new day began. Across Buddhist monasteries, wooden bells, drums, or gongs announced the beginning of morning prayers. Every culture found its own way of greeting the dawn. As towns grew larger during the 18th and 19th centuries, one particularly unusual profession appeared: the knocker-up. Imagine still sleeping peacefully before sunrise. Outside your window, a man walks quietly through the empty street, carrying a long bamboo pole. He stops beneath your bedroom. Carefully raising the pole, he taps gently against the glass. Tap, 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 just enough to wake you. He waits until he sees movement inside. Only then does he continue to the next house. Some knocker-ups carried short sticks. Others used lightweight fishing rods for upper-story windows. A few even fired dried peas through long tubes to strike bedroom windows without damaging the glass. It sounds almost humorous today.
Yet this became an important occupation in parts of Britain during the Industrial Revolution. Factory workers needed to arrive before sunrise. Reliable alarm clocks remained expensive. Hiring a human alarm clock solved the problem. In many neighborhoods, everyone knew exactly when the knocker-up would arrive. His punctuality could determine whether workers kept their jobs. Of course, most people throughout history never met a knocker-up. Instead, they relied upon simpler habits. Parents woke children. Older siblings woke younger ones. Neighbors sometimes called across small village streets. Experience itself became a dependable alarm. After years of rising at nearly the same hour, many people found they no longer needed any outside reminder at all. Their bodies simply knew. The changing seasons also influenced waking times. During summer, daylight arrived very early. Work often began before the heat of midday. Winter mornings were different. Sunrise came later. Cold temperatures encouraged families to remain beneath blankets just a little longer whenever possible. Still, farm animals rarely allowed anyone to sleep late. Cows needed milking. Sheep required feeding. Horses expected care.
The responsibilities of village life waited for no one. Morning routines followed familiar patterns. Someone stirred the ashes in the fireplace. A few glowing coals sprang back to life beneath fresh pieces of wood. Water was fetched from the well. Bread was sliced. Simple porridge simmered over the fire. Children rubbed sleep from their eyes while parents quietly prepared for another demanding day. There was little rushing. No frantic search for lost keys. No traffic reports. The day unfolded according to rhythms that had changed very little for generations. Interestingly, historians believe many people rarely overslept. Without artificial light encouraging late nights, bedtime naturally arrived earlier. The body received more consistent signals from sunrise and sunset. Modern sleep researchers often point to these regular light patterns as one reason our ancestors maintained remarkably steady daily routines. As the morning grows brighter, the entire village slowly comes alive. Smoke rises once again from every chimney. Dogs greet passing neighbors. The sound of wooden carts begins to fill the roads. Another ordinary day has begun. Yet change is quietly approaching. In just a few centuries, new inventions will begin pushing darkness away. Gas lamps will brighten city streets. Factories will remain busy after sunset. Eventually, electric light will transform night itself into something entirely different. The ancient rhythm of sleeping with the sun will slowly begin to disappear. And that extraordinary transformation is the story we will explore next.
For thousands of years, humanity had accepted a simple truth. When the sun disappeared, the world grew quiet. Work slowed. Families gathered around the fire. Candles burned carefully. And before long, most people settled into bed beneath the darkness. It was a rhythm that had remained remarkably unchanged across countless generations. But no rhythm lasts forever. Slowly, almost unnoticed at first, the night itself began to change. The first signs appeared long before electricity. In growing towns and prosperous cities, people searched for better ways to push back the darkness. Candles became slightly more affordable. Oil lamps improved. Glass lanterns protected flames from the wind, making outdoor travel a little safer. These small improvements did not transform society overnight, but they marked the beginning of a new relationship with the evening. During the 18th century, another important innovation began spreading across parts of Europe: gas lighting. Instead of relying solely on candles or oil lamps, towns started experimenting with pipes that carried manufactured gas to specially designed street lamps. For the first time, important roads and public squares could remain illuminated long after sunset. The change was remarkable. People who had once hurried home before darkness now found themselves walking through softly lit streets. Shops remained open a little later. Theaters welcomed evening audiences. Coffee houses filled with conversation well into the night. City life slowly stretched beyond daylight. Still, these early gas lamps had limitations. They required constant maintenance. Workers walked through the streets each evening, lighting every lamp by hand using long poles with small flames attached to the end.
Before sunrise, they returned once more to extinguish them. This occupation became so familiar that many city residents could recognize the lamplighter by sound alone. His footsteps echoed through quiet streets as one lamp after another flickered into life. Watching an entire avenue gradually brighten must have felt almost magical. Yet outside growing cities, life remained much the same. Most villages still depended on candles, fireplaces, and the moon. Farmers continued rising with the sun. Children still fell asleep beside crackling fires. The old rhythms survived for many decades beyond the cities. At home, lighting also continued to improve. Better oil lamps produced brighter flames while using less fuel. Reflective metal surfaces helped direct more light across rooms. Glass chimneys protected flames from sudden drafts while reducing smoke. Even these modest improvements allowed families to read, sew, or work a little longer after sunset. Books gradually became evening companions rather than daylight necessities alone. Students studied later into the night. Writers filled journals beneath steady lamplight. Scientists conducted experiments that once would have been impossible after dark. The evening slowly became productive instead of purely restful. Not everyone welcomed these changes. Some worried that longer working hours placed greater strain upon ordinary laborers. Others feared cities growing busier after dark encouraged crime rather than reducing it. Every technological advance brought both opportunity and new challenges.
Perhaps the greatest transformation came quietly. People no longer viewed sunset as a firm ending. Instead, darkness became something to overcome. The night gradually lost part of its mystery. Brilliant stars became harder to see above growing cities. The Milky Way slowly disappeared behind expanding clouds of smoke and artificial light.
Children raised in busy urban neighborhoods often saw far fewer stars than their grandparents had admired. Without realizing it, humanity's relationship with the sky began to change. Sleep changed as well. Families stayed awake longer. Evening conversations lasted later into the night. People delayed bedtime because they finally could. The ancient habit of first and second sleep became less common. As daylight lost its authority over daily schedules, human routines slowly drifted away from nature.